Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact.
Hi, this is Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to an episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. This is a podcast by and about and for family businesses. And I have a family business advisor with me today whose name is Doug Gray. Doug is based in Nashville, Tennessee, is a graduate of the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and has a PhD in organizational leadership, industrial and organizational psychology, and he has worked with many Fortune 100 and 1000 businesses, as well as he is the founder of the Family Business Collaboration. So we'll just drop a little hint on what that is at the end of the show, but it's a growing organization that he founded during the pandemic of family business experts and advisors. And so let me welcome Doug to the show. Doug is also the owner and founder of Action Learning, which is a company based out of Nashville. So Doug, thanks for joining me today.
Glad to help. Hope it's useful.
Fantastic. Let's get started. Let's just jump right into it. So at Action Learning, you talk about, you use the phrase, quote, "We develop smarter leaders faster." Now, who wouldn't want a smarter leader to work faster? So what do you mean by that? And how do you do it?
Well, you and I share a background in geographically in New York, and we know that direct language sometimes works. So let's get it done now. And efficiency is one measure of success. And I think also the fact is folks have not been taught how to be great leaders, especially family business leaders. It's a gap in our world, in our geography, and our economy. Some 65% of our GDP is tied to family-owned businesses, and yet people have not been taught how to be leaders. So all my career, I focused on leadership development. Back in '97, I was in DC, and that's when I started Action Learning Associates. So I've been a solopreneur since and done a number of things in a number of different sectors. But I think there's a massive gap in leadership development. How's that?
Yeah, well, let's talk about what that gap is. Is it more in family businesses? Is it more in smaller business and medium-sized businesses? I mean, you've worked up and down all size companies. And I know from your background, I didn't go into it, but you've covered pretty much any industry that one could think of.
Yeah, I like being agnostic that way because I don't ever pretend to specialize in finance or technology or healthcare or retail. It doesn't matter. The fact is that if we focus on our definition of what it means to be a leader, let's start there and eliminate a little bit of confusion, and then I can answer the question about how we develop those skills.
So let's start there. What is the definition of a leader then?
Man,
because someone once said to me, leadership is like beauty. It's when you see it, but it's really hard to define. So what is it? Tell us.
When was that? 1997?
Yeah.
I think that's evasive and sloppy. Leadership, the academics know, is when we rally others and we're able to influence the behavior of followers, in particular, toward a desired outcome. Boom, definition. And the primary skill is public optimism. When Jonathan's in front of the audience and he's saying something like, "We're going to take the hill, and here's how we're going to take the hill," people will follow you or not. That's what leaders do, always have throughout history. So there's nothing sloppy about that definition.
Right.
Sloppy, I think, is that folks confuse it with other hats Jonathan might wear. So when you wear your manager hat, by definition, you're maximizing the productivity of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And the manager in you, or anybody, has to coach them. That's the primary skill of managers, is coaching others. Well, people have never been taught that distinction, and they've never been taught how to be leaders or managers. So that's what I do.
I think it's a really big distinction. And one of the distinctions that I use along with the leader is getting someone to follow you, and is charting, communicating a vision that will chart a course of where we're going to go, which then outlines the direction, the strategy, the plans. But management, and I'm going to steal a page from Brian Tracy's one of his books, where he talks about management is like seven keys to management. I think it was planning, organizing, staffing, supervising, measuring, reporting, and now I forgot the seventh. But they're very different, I think, than leading. So
different skills, and just as your definition explained, sometimes some academics will want to deconstruct it and suggest that these are the 7 characteristics that you must have in order to be a competent manager. There's no evidence that works. There's the evidence is much clearer that Mintzberg is probably the best academic on what it means to be a manager. But Harold Mintzberg's at MIT or Harvard. And he talks about different planes of managing. And then it's a 3-dimensional model, and he talks about the complexity of that and how confusing it can be for many people. The point, I think, is to have some theoretical construct, some model. I believe that people can become better, that optimism will drive us all toward a better future. And not everybody I've met believes that. Many folks I've met will say, your family's broken, the business is broken, I'm a turnaround expert, let me tell you how to fix it, and you are all broken parts. Well, that machine metaphor is very limited. If we look at the diversity in our cultures and we look at the diversity and complexity of every organization, it just doesn't work. So another thought is to look at systems thinking, and there's lots of examples, but Peter Senge is probably one of the most prolific. If you look at the natural systems in your body as white blood cells respond to an infection, that's how families respond to COVID and to any disruption. You talk about disruptions, I imagine, in your book.
Mm-hmm.
It's a systemic response. So it's individuals, groups together, organized or not, taking the hill, figuring out how their followers can lead to a better future.
Okay, so let's get back to that question of developing smarter leaders faster. Is there a methodology? I mean, is there a series of tools or assessments that you use? How do you do it?
Absolutely.
Give us an overview.
Yes, and the long answer is that it varies so much by each client. A lot of my work has been with individuals in small teams, 10 or fewer people.
Mm-hmm.
I also taught and founded and created a program at the University of Maryland, College Park, called the Leadership Development Institute, and helped to run that for 7 years. And in that group, we had 50 people. And I've had audiences with 800 or 1,000. But the real focus on organizational change is smaller groups, let's say 5 to 10 people.
Which, by the way, is consistent with, I think, some of the latest thinking about teams and the natural size of teams. They're small beehives of 5 to 10 people. And Jeff Bezos certainly championed this concept, like no team should be larger than like the 2 pizza rule. So
actually a dated number, and it was called 5 to 10 because HR people thought it was a reasonable number of people to manage.
Mm-hmm.
It was a top-down compliance issue. At Google, for instance, they'll say a minimum of 15 is expected.
Mm-hmm.
So how many direct reports do you think it takes to get the job done? It's a very flat business organizational model. So I think it's business dependent. It depends on the sector. It also depends on the skills of that leader. If you trusted 15 or 20 people to do their jobs, and each of them wrote their objectives and their key results, and you reviewed them on a frequency, say quarterly, and you assumed that they were more than capable, that they're smarter than you, that they're more than capable of getting the work done, they're self-directed, that's where the innovation comes from at Google.
Right.
So one answer to your question of how do we get this done is by using different models. The top-down hierarchical model is ancient, it's always going to continue, and is limiting. It's the case in Silicon Valley that an organizational network model, think of it as a spider web or a snowflake, is driven by a different way of making decisions. And that's OKRs, or objectives and key results.
Okay.
So is the book. Last November, I published OKR Leadership, and the subtitle is How to Apply Silicon Valley's Secret Sauce to Your Career. That's the individual level, your team, whatever size that is, and your organization. OKRs are the secret sauce behind the biggest distribution of wealth in human history. In the last 40 years, more money has been migrated to one geography, Northern California, and one valley, Silicon Valley, than ever in history.
Right.
The fascinating fact.
And you attribute that to OKRs? Is that what you're suggesting? So tell listeners, what are OKRs for those who are not familiar?
It's descriptive. It's easy to describe and it's hard to implement, but objectives are what you do, and OKRs are how you measure what you do.
Gotcha.
So the simplest form is a piece of paper with 3 objectives on it. And for each objective, you've got maybe 3 or 4 measures, maybe on a quarterly basis. And you write them, not your boss, because you are driving your business.
Yep. So they're similar to priorities, like maybe quarterly priorities or what some people would call rocks, and KPIs, which are key performance indicators, which oftentimes are leading indicators.
The difference is KPIs are typically written top down by the manager, and rocks are typically written by the individual. So there's a lot of free information at one of my websites, okrleadership.com. Might be a good resource for folks.
Okay.
Download chapter 1 of that book, and they could certainly buy it in all of its forms from that. But OKRs are not limited to technology or Silicon Valley. I've done them with a pharmaceutical practice group with 20 people, and I've done them with a Fortune 500 auto salvage company, which implemented them pre-COVID so that they could respond to COVID, and they've done a masterful job ever since. When we think about OKRs as a management tool or decision-making tool, it enables, back to that definition, it enables managers to maximize the productivity of others by trusting that they'll do their jobs well, and there's a degree of accountability and transparency. Does that make sense?
I think so. For our listeners, so why does someone who's a PhD in psychology become an expert in OKRs? It seems like 2 very different things. And so tell us a little bit about your PhD and what your PhD, I know it was in organizational leadership and industrial organizational psychology, how it translates to OKRs. Like give us the collapse version of how you get from here to there.
The OKR work came in 2018 and 2019 in response to client requests. I had a president of a Fortune 500 who didn't have a decision-making structure. And I asked, are you familiar with OKRs? He said no. And I worked with the leadership team in Chicago for a couple of days, and then regionally all over the world, well, all over North America. And that expanded in that one example. But back to your question about academic research. I come from a family of academics. I'd always wanted to get a PhD. My master's work in 1990, whatever it was, 92, was at Dartmouth in psychology. So I created a risk-taking assessment, doing a bunch of statistical analysis that was beyond me at the time. I was teaching AP English. This was sort of the other half of my brain. And it was formative, but it also made me realize I didn't want to do stats for that career. So I did applied psychology. I led a nonprofit, and I led all kinds of training initiatives, and then I started my company. But I always knew I wanted to get back into that academic world just a little bit. So we spent 10 years in DC, 10 years in Charlotte, and then 5 years ago moved to Nashville to support my wife's career. At the same time, both kids had left the house, so we had an empty nest. We had some tuition still to pay, but I thought, why not jump in and start paying tuition? So I went back to school. And that's when I took the course of study that I found to be the best at the Chicago School of Professional Psych.
And it was that where you developed the AdFit protocol. Can you tell us what that is? That's one of your tools, I guess, to get smarter leaders moving faster. So tell us, what is the ADFIT protocol? Is that it's an acronym, I take it, for something?
It is. And I trademarked it because clients, it's all client driven, at a Fortune 100 healthcare company said, Doug, this is really good. You really ought to trademark it. So that scale it to more of our clients. So ADFIT is pretty simple. And yes, it came out of my dissertation research. So ADFIT stands for AD. The A and the D is assessing somebody's strengths, and then the D is defining a meaningful outcome.
Mm-hmm.
If I know Jonathan's strengths and I know what Jonathan thinks is important, he needs to define this outcome in the next 6 months or 12 months, then that gives us a focus to work on. And then there's a hyphen, and the F and the I and the T stand for focus, intervention, and takeaways. So in each coaching session, for instance, or training session, I'd ask, what do you want to focus on today? Have you considered this intervention or this interaction? Intervention is just a psychologically nerdy word for something that's empirically validated.
Mm-hmm.
And then the T is I close the session by asking, what are you taking away from this conversation that you might do next? Because the client needs to do the work, not me. And they take notes and I take notes, and we open the next session, and I might remind them of their assessments, their strengths. I'll ask, do you still want to stay focused on defining this outcome? And then what do you want to focus on today? So it gives us a structure. So there's probably a part of you that wants to ask, why the heck is there a need for structure? Are you going to ask me that?
Well, I'm thinking that it sounds very much like what a coaching session looks and sounds like. And so this is the structure to a coaching session. It's the basic, it's the beginning, the middle, and the end.
It is. And I developed ADFIT in part because coaches don't have protocols. I've been doing executive coaching for a long time. And when I saw that gap in the world, there's lots of self-declared executive coaches, like 60,000 of them, many of whom are terrifying in their practices. They do not have a protocol. They don't have a theoretical construct that assumes that Jonathan is capable of doing good work. And I think that creates confusion in the marketplace. So my dissertation research was on the effects of positive psychology coaching protocols. What are they? And then, is it true that if somebody assumes more positive assumptions about a client, that will have different effects, in fact, better effects than if somebody assumes something else, like doesn't have any coaching protocols?
So a protocol to me is another word for a procedure or a process. And one of the tools that I found really valuable in my one-on-one coaching, which got introduced to me back in, I want to say 2006 or 7, maybe 8, was a 1.5 page form that would be filled out prior to a coaching session. That would be the same each week. And the top half of the form would be a set of indicators. On one side would be leading, on the other side would be lagging, because just like you go to the doctor, you need to check the vital signs, and you want to look at the results of the most recent lab tests. So that's like the financial statements. And then the bottom half were a structured set of questions, like what were your wins, what did you accomplish, what didn't you and why, what do you want to talk about, and what were the goals that you set from last time, and did you get them done, why or why not. So I think that type of a protocol made for a very good structure. And coaching clients who did not fill that out or were inconsistent got lesser results than those who filled it out thoroughly and took the time. Made a lot of sense to me. And it was the repeated practice of it that was valuable.
Yeah, it might make a lot of sense to you and to 50% of the world that's more structured than not. But for an unstructured person, they'll rebel, and rightfully. Artists, for instance, free spirits, free thinkers.
Entrepreneurs.
Yeah, anybody who, which is a large part of our business coaching clientele. So I wouldn't want ever to state that if they didn't fill it out, they might not get value from your session. I'd hope that they would.
Yes.
And I'd also assume that a little structure goes a long way, right? that structure for you helps, and it helps many of your clients. Is that correct?
Correct. And like, I would never say that you won't get value, but I do think you'll get more value. And that part of why you've hired me is, so I go with the premise that most entrepreneurs are ADD, and that's how they got started in their entrepreneurial venture, but that they need someone to put a little bit of structure and process into the business. And that if we can do this together, then we can focus on what are the outcomes that they want. And that, like, that's the intervention part of me that's saying, look, if you just keep running amok, if you keep changing the conversation every 5 minutes and it's like, we keep twisting and turning, we're not going to get to where we're trying to get to as fast, because we're going to be going and running down a lot of different, rabbit holes. So
there are a lot of perspectives there. So your approach is much more consultative than some others. Mm-hmm. Many coaches in the International Coaching Federation would say what you're doing is not coaching at all. It's consulting, and it's teaching a person who has a divergent thinking pattern, like an ADD person, mm-hmm. adopt your script. And they'll say, it's a square hole in a round box, and it's just not, it's the challenge. It's going to be very hard. And I'm sure people who are ADD, and
yes.
So that frustration could be structurally impossible for some of your clients. I hope not.
I think you're right. I mean, I'm dealing with one person right now who's built a $10 million company, but it was $20 million a year ago. But he lost money at 20 million, like a fair amount. And so now he's at 10 million, and he wants to get to 100 million. And I feel very strongly that, he can be a big picture thinking type person, but he needs that, EOS talks about an integrator. He needs that COO who's in charge of operations that he can communicate with, accept and tolerate well, and who will put the structure in, because without it, there's no predictability that we can get to 100 million and be profitable. And what's the point? I'd rather be a $1 million company making 10% than a $100 million company losing 1%. So what's the answer? What is your thought? What does ICF say in terms of coaching someone who's unstructured in their thinking?
Well, I don't agree with this, but I've subscribed to it for about 20 years as an ICF member. They would say the process is more important than the outcome. And I don't agree, because it's not good business sense, and it's not, with my clients, realistic. So the question, the word coaching protocols came to me when I was working with a Fortune 50 healthcare company here in Nashville, and they said, Doug, we get that you can staff executive coaches throughout the country for 50 physicians in this Physician Leadership Academy. But what are your coaching protocols? Well, as you know, healthcare is driven by protocols. They define safety and life and death decisions. And I stuttered, because coaches don't talk about protocols. Even the EOS and Rockefeller folks, they don't say this is a protocol. I think we need to adopt that word. It's an example of organizational maturity, of professional maturity. So you and I might be on the side of the fence that says there are such things as coaching protocols, and they need to be adopted over time. And we might provide more value and make more money for ourselves and for our clients than some other coaches in the ICF world who would ask, what would it feel like? How would you get there? Very open-ended process orientation. Nothing right or wrong, just not a side of the fence I want to be in.
I think that small businesses in particular, and any family business that I've ever worked with, they're very results oriented. Which makes it difficult if you're trying to work on leadership development, because it's hard to measure that. I guess objectively you could do a survey of the people around, right? A 360, and let's do a before and let's do an evaluation midway. Has this person improved? Have you seen improvement? And
I want to cut you off because it's not hard.
Okay. It's done.
Consulting is a trend. And the fact is that I think consultants have been sloppy and avoided questions of return on investment, on the value of an investment, the return on time investments. Well, ROI, VOI, and ROTI are easy enough measures. A case study that connects your current impact from any business metric, whatever it is that's currently being used, can add a question like, to what extent do you attribute this outcome to your consulting work with Jonathan? And if they say 10%, then 10% of 100 million is that number. And that's easy math. Well, why don't we do that more often? I think it's
yeah, that's a good question.
Avoid it. And I think that's just our immaturity. It's a newness of the field. And I see this particularly in family business consulting.
Why more so in family business consulting?
Publicly traded companies have a fiscal responsibility to return shareholder value, and they're driven by a degree of transparency by the SEC that obliges them to share some of those fiscal results.
Mm-hmm.
What happens in a privately owned company? And I'm not talking about 30% of the S&P, which are family owned.
Mm-hmm.
But let's imagine that any size company has a significant fiscal responsibility to the owners, because that's the difference with family owned businesses. And they choose to not share that information with their next generation leaders. I think that's a massive opportunity for us, for you and I, and for others. And I think that's, frankly, the next swim lane, field, blue ocean, pick your metaphor.
Interesting. Okay, so the last study that I know of, it's quite dated. It was called, I think, the Manchester study. It was looking at the return on coaching investment. I think it's decades old. I think it was a very small sample size. And what you're suggesting is that there's the ability to measure that return on coaching investment. You had a few other names for it. You can explain what those are. I'm not familiar with those terms, but that if we could move away from this sort of archaic bill for, time and hours, or, most of us are doing daily rate work, but that's ultimately based on an hourly rate. We talk in terms of the value, but we don't really have ways that we know how to measure it. So where do you see what's the bleeding cutting edge on this? How does it done?
Thumbnail, but I'll tell you that it is new, and driving changes always difficult. Most of the consultants I've ever worked with bill on time and money, and it's endemic in our worlds. Attorneys are often cited for being unethical because of scope creep and increased costs that are hard to explain to the clients.
Mm-hmm.
In a different worldview, a more precise view would include phases of operation. Let's say I'm going to work with Jonathan's company. I'm just going to use your name. And when we get to this phase, or this number of sales or net profitability, then we'll move to the next phase. And all these are co-designed by the leaders of the business and myself as the subject matter expert. That's an outcome-based coaching contract or consulting contract. So it's a series of phased approaches or statements of work. When we get there, if we get there faster than not, you're happy and I'm happy. Took less time and money.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've been doing for decades. And it's
interesting.
New, and it's natural, but it's terrifying to many consultants. So last night, I spent a couple hours developing content for that topic for a number of my colleagues in the Family Business Consulting Group, which I haven't explained yet. But
yes, we'll get there in a moment.
We are the leaders in family business consulting globally.
Mm-hmm.
I've recently joined the group in the last 2 years, and it's phenomenal. Brilliant, prolific, many authors, many PhDs, and many who have taken those academic ties and applied them to consulting opportunities that are massive. I won't ever reveal numbers, but the scale is vast. And the company, the firm, is the leader for a number of good reasons. But the main reason, I think, is a generous, ethical spirit of collaboration, of sharing. So the content that I developed last night is for a virtual session that I'll do in a few weeks on outcome-based consulting. It is a shift that some of my colleagues there won't want because they don't need to. They've been selling and delivering time-based programs forever, and they will be able to continue doing so. However, if you think about some of the people who are driving change in the world, they don't look like you and I, Jonathan. They're not white men of a certain age. And as millennials are driving change in the world, they will in family business leadership development. I'm excited about that.
And is this arisen because of a pain point that's been brought to you by customers, clients, saying, Doug, I just don't understand. I'm making this up. I just don't understand how you are charging this much money. You know, we all have consultants, coaches. We have a reputation of charging a lot. And we're charging based on what we think is the value, but they haven't seen the value yet. And so, you know, and they're from Missouri, you know, the show me state, like show me the results first. So is this coming out of specific requests, or are you seeing this out of something, just a broader need, or both?
A shift in consulting. There's a number of studies that I could share with you that are much more current than the ROI study from Manchester, which, by the way, had a 500% ROI.
Yeah.
That part of PwC's research, but it's dated. Yep. I guarantee at least 100% ROI for my clients. I've been doing it since 97. Why wouldn't I guarantee that? And why wouldn't I imply that there's numbers, there's ways to measure each of those phases in the statement of work? That's what I've done for decades.
And so what was that ROI guarantee? What was the percent?
Over 100.
Okay, great. So, I have a brand promise of a 3-to-1 return. And I tell people that they shouldn't hire me if they don't think that together our partnership can lead to a 3-to-1 return. But it doesn't very often get measured. And I should be held to that, brand promise.
We will be in 10 or 20 years. There's a number of examples of disruptive consulting. Mm-hmm. And it's becoming a thing. It's becoming a client-driven demand because it's more precise.
Fantastic. I'm thrilled to learn and continue to be a part of it. Consulting has been a part of my life for 30 plus years. So tell us a little bit more about the Family Business Consulting Group. What types of services do you offer? What types of clients do you serve? Where do you serve them? You know, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's the global leader which tells you. Globally, we provide more services than anyone. Almost all are collaborative, meaning 2 or more consultants might work on an engagement. Many are multi-year, and just as a family business evolves into an enterprise or an office with multiple needs, the business has evolved over 25 years in many ways. So probably the best answer is to invite people to go to the website, which is the word FBCG.com, FamilyBusinessConsultingGroup.com. For a couple of reasons. There's hundreds of articles. So not only are we prolific, but we share and give away any article on any topic you can imagine. And we're growing the number of YouTube videos and digital content there. But the short answer is what you might expect: succession planning, conflict communication, leadership development, board selection and development, and strategic planning.
And would you say that certain people are more expert in some of those topics than others, or is everyone expected to be a generalist, very strong in each one of those disciplines?
These are the authors and fathers and mothers of our field. They're astounding people, generous, smart, humble, and I invite you to do more research. How's that? I invite anybody.
Yeah, no, I actually probably stumbled upon it when I started writing my book and started writing blog post articles on family business, and then I started seeing, oh wow, all these people that had written books were part of this group. Very impressive stuff and very helpful, really helpful resource to me in even writing my book. So.
Right.
So now you've also created a new organization that's just in its seedling stage. I know you don't want to lift the covers on it too much, but this is a collaboration group that's different and separate from the consulting group. And so, what's the overlap there? What's the distinction?
So everyone who is a consultant at the Family Business Consulting Group is an independent consultant. I've got my own LLC, Action Learning Associates, from '97. And I wear three hats. So in this conversation. So Action Learning Associates is one hat, Family Business Consulting Group is a second hat. And during COVID, as some of my revenue decreased, I looked around and asked, what's the market opportunity here? What could I be doing with more time and digital resources? And that led me to create, with a business partner, the Family Business Collaboration. Yeah, it's in its infancy and it's exploding. So I've reached out to several hundred people who are my level one connections or fellow members of the Family Firm Institute. I've written several articles for FFI as practitioner and invited them to join as founding members. The invitation there is to let the snowball build and collaboratively share content so that people might find it useful when they're doing the educational or continuing ed or leadership development or next generation development that's mandatory. Currently, there's not, in my opinion, that collective resource that's digitally available at low cost. And I think there could be. So we'll see where it goes. Hopefully in a year's time, we'll know more.
I'm excited to be a part of it and excited to see where it goes also. So it's great to be on the ground floor of something. So, all right. Any closing thoughts before I ask people, how you tell people how and where they can reach you? Closing thoughts on the subject.
I think we've got a huge responsibility for family business leaders. When I was a biological father, nobody taught me how to become a biological father. When I became a husband, nobody taught me how to be a leader of a family. And we could. We've got access now to more digital content and collective wisdom than ever in human history. It's not hard to learn the wisdom of family leadership in India. Pick your country. And the fact is, we've got access to that information, but we don't always apply it. And I think that's the place for any of us as advisors and consultants to help people move faster.
Great.
Become better leaders.
Doug, how and where can people reach you?
Bunch of places. Action-learning.com is my mothership. It's the main website with lots of products and ways to contact me there. I mentioned earlier okrleadership.com, which has information and downloads and ways to purchase that book. There's also a bunch of video content. I did not mention adfit.org, which has 5 or 6 digital courses of content where people can learn about how to apply AdFit in their organizations and also get a digital certification. And I also mentioned the fbcg.com, which is a tremendous resource for any size family business. And I think the last one is familybusinesscollaboration.com.
Great. Awesome. Well, Doug, it's great to have an entrepreneur, solopreneur with such a well-educated and versed, resume, CV that you bring to this. And so I hope that people will look you up and participate. And this is Jonathan Goldhill with the Disruptive Successor Show. And I want to thank Doug Gray for being my guest today.
Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.